Honey!
Yeah.
Did you remember to wash the dishes?
Hi, this is The Cat's Library. I'll be your librarian today. That little bit of animation that you just saw took an accumulative 12 to 13 hours to complete over the course of 3 months. It's about 87 frames. Let's talk about it. Engage speed animation. I started out with this blue sketch of a head turn. It was 11 frames in total that became the base of my keyframes. It took about 12 minutes, and I was making up the movement as I went along. Next, I added in a slightly more detailed sketch layer in black over the blue. I started with the first frame and worked my way to the 11th. I set the previous frame to low opacity and determined how the frame would look based on a combination of the blue sketch and the previous black sketch. Design-wise, I gave him a similar mouth to what Sprite has, with the rounded overall shape and one rounded fang. There were certain angles that this looked sort of strange in, but for most of the ones that he has teeth showing ended up looking pretty good. This was originally supposed to be an attempt at animated expressions, and so I gave him eyebrows, even though that doesn't quite make sense. It's a cartoon, don't question it. I also tried something interesting with the eyes, where the eye and eyelid were all in a circle, so that I just have to focus on moving the eyelids up and down instead of having a bunch of eye shapes. Not sure if I explained that well. Having easily visible eyelids also helped with the expression. You've seen pretty much all of my attempts at character animation on this channel. I am very new to animating, and so especially here in the beginning sections, I didn't really keep the character on model. The eyes change sizes when they aren't supposed to, and the muzzle is a bunch of different shapes. I didn't pay attention to the spine, and so the movement doesn't make the most sense. This is all okay because I think I fixed most of it. It's just the having all of these little mistakes that I needed to fix probably contributing to this taking so long. After that, I went into the final-ish keyframes. I started with this sketch that looks like it was frame 9 because it was my favorite, and I wanted to model the rest of the frames to look like it because of the previously stated problem of the inconsistent frames. For a lot of these, I drew the line art in orange because it stood out well against the black and blue of the previous sketches, and then I made it black later. I gave him an actual chest instead of having the chest, neck, and belly be a single mass. I also decided that I wanted to draw the whole frame, including the color, all at the same time. So I copied the line art and then fill bucketed in the colors on the underlying layer. This was a very simple color palette because I still wanted the main focus to be on the animation and didn't want it to be too complicated for myself. I did try a few different teeth and eye colors until I found something just right. After that, I went forward to frames 10 and 11. These had a similar style to 9, and so I didn't have to change them as much to stay on what I decided the model was. It looks like early in the process I copied my color layers and then modified them to fit the line art of the new frame. Then I worked backward from frame 9. Part of this was because around this point, I had decided that I wanted there to be a more exaggerated jump animation instead of the subtle head lift of the previous 2 sketch layers, and I was worried about that, so I put it off until a bit later. I hadn't quite realized that the head kept changing shape as much as it did with these interim keyframes. I tried to have a little bit of physics on the face fluff so that it looked like it was being dragged behind independent of the wolf. Little bit of secondary motion that I drew in backward there. Not sure how well that comes across in the final. I took the black sketch that I had decided would be the top of the jump and used the distort tool to push it into a more dynamic position, and also added the tail to really accent the pose. I didn't keep this on model since I was working on my squash and stretch, and this was a stretch frame. I colored a bit outside the lines in the right side because that's the side where he was moving from. I was trying to simulate a bit of motion blur because I wanted the jump to be on the faster side. I then drew the first frame. I tried to make it similar to the third keyframe so that the jump would have the same start and stop point. The plan for this section of the video was to cut some of the in-betweens out, to cut down on the length of the overall video and to avoid repeating myself for certain repetitive sections where I didn't really change that much. So I'm going to describe the initial jump and a little bit of the less dynamic in-betweens and then skip ahead a bit. At the start of the tween frames here, I put in a breakdown at the bottom of the jump. I started using the onion skin feature with every drawing going forward. This is the squash of the squash and stretch and is pretty much the middle of the first and second frames. I think that is the true definition of what a breakdown is. At this point, I wanted the movement to be more snappy. I'm not the best at gauging how many in-betweens I need, so I just defaulted to 8 for most of these. 6 for a few in the middle for the head turn because the keyframes were pretty close together. I added a few more frames that I initially wanted for the jump, but I liked the smooth-looking motion that I accidentally came up with. I tweaked and changed certain frames as I went along and also added a couple stagnant poses at the beginning in anticipation of the jump with a quick blink animation for personality. This is the longest stretch of in-betweens in the animation with a total of 10 frames. I'm not sure if the spear frame at the top of the jump could count as a keyframe or if it is a breakdown looking back, but I logged it as a keyframe, so that's what we're going with. 4 of the frames were stagnant, 4 frames to get to the bottom of the jump with 8 in total from 1 frame to the breakdown. From the bottom of the jump to the top was 4 frames to get that springy bounce. Pretty much all of these were smear frames where I got really distorted shapes because I was drawing the motion and not necessarily the character. With a couple of stagnant frames, I think I got better at staying on model deeper into the process. Also, his leg disappears for that one breakdown at the bottom of the jump, which was because I was thinking that the leg wouldn't be visible from that angle. But the fur lines in the preceding and following frames sort of draw attention to it. Probably not that big of a deal. It's just that you can track how much better I got at paying attention to smaller details as the animation went on, and having tufts appear and disappear because I drew them inconsistently on the keyframes became a common problem with the whole animation. I told you I was new to this and didn't really know what I was doing. This was especially prominent when it comes to getting from the top of the jump back to the middle of the frame. I don't know how to do that or whether I wanted it to be fast or slow or a combination. I'm not good at de-escalation apparently. I decided to go with slow in the end, but it looks like at this point in the process I was going for something fast. If I really wanted it fast, I probably should have had at least one smear frame that bridged the gap between the 2 frames. What was tripping me up was dynamic motion from the top of the jump down. but it's also going from a distorted motion blur pose back to something grounded and normal. I came back to tweak this multiple times. Now for this next section, I was much more focused on getting the lines to look right. With Photoshop, the onion skin feature is set between two keyframes, and so I would use that for the first frame, and then I would turn off the first keyframe and work from the previous in between. It was a mildly tedious process. A lot of these frames in the head turn were in slightly different angles from each other. It was more difficult to work this out in the keyframe section, while here with the in-betweens it was slightly easier. It still required focus to make the frames different from each other, but still like one continuous motion. I paid more attention to the face. The tufts of fur on his leg and neck and back look off because I didn't trace over them exactly as was necessary. I intentionally moved some of those around from keyframe to keyframe to make the animation feel alive, but in practice with all the in-betweens, then this is a little bit distracting. I'm not sure how best to describe it. It's a cool effect, it's just unintentional. Jumping ahead, this is one of my favorite sets that wasn't the jump. My other favorite I didn't record because it was that last set between frames, and I was thinking that I didn't need to record every section. I'll point it out later. So for this one, there is an interesting change of expression going on, which I think might be my favorite thing to animate, and I sort of changed which drawing was a keyframe because I liked a different drawing better. The way that I've been doing most of this is setting the in-betweens to play for 0 seconds and the keyframes to play for 0.2 of a second. I don't know what that means. I think Photoshop might automatically set stuff to 30 frames a second, and I didn't know how to change that. I think I might need to get a better animation software sometime soon. Back during the keyframes, I set them each to 1 second. It was easier to see when it was so few frames. When it comes back to these frames that you're watching now, I did make a mistake. I brought in some cheek fluff and then faded it out and then brought it in again. Hopefully it makes some sort of sense. The thing that I like about these is that it is the first instance of moving the fur to aid with the emotion. Also, I really liked the drawing that I did for the eyes bugging out slightly and the gums showing. I did make the gums the same color as the eyelids, which I think I've seen dogs with black speckles on their gums. So I guess it makes sense. There aren't any drawings with his mouth open, and it felt weird to add a new color into the palette for one drawing. I misremembered and thought this frame was after the original keyframe, but apparently I drew it before. I replayed the footage a few times before deciding to switch it to the hold frame and set the previous keyframe to a shorter time. A little bit into the next batch of tween frames, and I brought the tail back into frame. I like tails. I also started raising one front leg. I didn't keep the size consistent, and so I'm not sure if it had the intended effect of accentuating the final poses. Near the beginning of August, I tried to finish this, but there was more to do than I thought, and so I took the rest of the month off. After I came back to it earlier this month, I finished up the final 8 in-betweens and then recorded the footage that I had up to that point. It looks something like this. I knew that there was something off about the frames from the top of the jump to the resting pose before the head turn. Throughout the process, I made multiple tweaks to it, but here was the point where I went in and made a second focused effort to fix it. One of my problems was that I drew these in chronological order, and so I was in smear frame mode when I got to this section. The smear frames didn't need to line up perfectly with each other, and my thought process was that going from crazier drawings to more grounded one was gradual, and so I'd go from more smear-like drawings earlier on and settle into the more solid animation. Here I tried to line everything up better. Part of it was also that when I was tweaking things, I would find one frame I thought was the problem and fix that frame without thinking of the repercussions of the overall movement. I think I got better by this point, but was able to get it to look seamless enough. Here's the full animation again. Okay, so I have a couple big ideas for future videos. I might have an alphabetical animals video out in the meantime if it ends up taking too long. I'll see you when I see you. Bye!